This is the BrainChip podcast. Hear from our thought leaders about neuromorphic computing, beneficial AI, and how BrainChip's Akita is pushing AI to the edge. This podcast is a place for investors, practitioners, and anyone interested in the future of AI.
Hi all, I'm Rob Telson, Vice President of Worldwide Sales at BrainChip. Welcome and thank you for joining our latest episode of our BrainChip podcast series. These events are structured to provide current and future investors and those interested in AI and the BrainChip technology a path to better understand who we are, what we are doing, and where we are going. If you've not listened to any of our podcasts, please go to our website at www.brainchip.com and visit our Learn tab and select podcasts. You can also listen to any of these podcasts on your favorite podcast platform, or please go to our YouTube channel at BrainChip Inc. and find all of our podcasts and additional media. Today, we have the pleasure of spending some time with Ian Drew. Ian is the king of disruption, a forward thinker and innovator. Ian is the chairman of Foundries.io and the co-founder of LifeScore Limited. Ian continues to play a pivotal role in driving new technologies that will impact our lives on a daily basis. He has had massive success in his career and by always being two steps ahead of the present. Ian, welcome to our podcast.
Rob, it's a pleasure to be here. Having known you for years, I'm humbled by your kind words.
Thanks, Ian. I got to tell you, I'm excited for this podcast. And for our listeners, I'm excited because I truly do not know where our conversations are going to take us today, but I do know that they will be full of vision and will help all of us truly understand the impact that the IoT space and AI, as they converge in general, will have on our daily lives. So let's kick this puppy off. Ian, why don't you take a moment and provide our listeners with a bit of background on yourself?
Hi, listeners. I'm Ian Drew. I've been around the tech industry what feels like 100 years, but I started off working at Intel for Andy Grove. Not directly for Andy Grove at the time. I was just a junior engineer, but I worked my way up to meet him. I then had the pleasure of working with people like Paul Ottolini and Sean Maloney. I worked in the Valley, worked in Asia, lived in Russia, and then joined a British company that gone boom bust called Arm. I joined them just as they were at the low point of their share price, which happened to be about 83p. We then restructured the company, found out how smartphones work, got ahead of the curve on that, managed to go win some quite interesting deals, expand the company, and then got sold off to SoftBank for $1 squazillion. What we did there was really get ahead of the curve. We looked at disruptive technologies. We looked at points of inflection in the industry, stuff that I'd learned from Andy Grove. If you read Only the Paranoid Survive, really that Intel roadmap, we used ARM. We looked at how platforms are developed, not just bit solutions, and we connected ecosystems together. Now I'm chairman of three companies, an AI music company called LifeScore, which is backed by people like Abbey Road Studios and Warner Music, an energy company trying to connect 1.6 gigawatts of power from Iceland to the UK, and a disruptive software business around IoT that's really trying to create the next Android platform really for IoT. I'm also vice chairman of the UK's largest gynecological cancer research charity as well, which aims to make women's lives significantly better by fixing early identification of female cancers. Oh, and by the way, I'm also a sheep farmer.
That's right. So I think for our listeners, I just want to highlight the fact that Ian's doing some amazing things, but he also brought up the fact that he talked a little bit about when he joined ARM, and he talked about the fact that hey, look, ARM has some great technology and we got to get ahead of the curve. And that's what he implemented at ARM. And he's doing the same things on a broader front now. But for this discussion, let's spend some time, and we're going to talk a little bit about AI and the world of AI in Ian's world. And I know Foundries.io is something true to your heart, and you're focused on that, as well as LifeScore. So if you want, let's start with Foundries.io, and why don't you talk about that a little bit, and why you guys established it, and where is it going?
I'll take it back a long way, because what I've known in the tech industry is there's nothing really new, but ultimately everything's really new. There's the playbook that you play out, but you play it in slightly different ways. A bit like a football game. You have to be able to have audibles, you have to be able to change. And for me, what we're doing really in the industry is looking at inflection points. And so you go back 10, 15 years. Rob, you remember the time before smartphones. You're old enough to have had a Nokia phone. And for me, it was a time when playing Snake was the most interesting thing you could do on a phone, or if you're lucky, played send text. But apart from that, it was really hard. You may have had a Motorola phone where the occasional game you could download, but it was really tough. And so for me, what we looked at in the industry then, and what the industry needed, was a horizontal platform. That was something that apps developers could go use. You could go make the power of the phone really valuable. And that happened in the phone industry because people like Apple and Google put together a software platform that allowed developers to really add value to that platform. It happened before that. It happened with Intel and Microsoft and the app stores, and how Excel and PowerPoint came about. And so for us, this industry is around creating horizontal platforms really to enable the true value of an industry to take place. Now, you also look at another disruption, which is AI. Everybody has used the internet. The internet's 50 years old this year. I've just seen the map of the first internet, and it was 23 different nodes as of 50 years ago in May. Now, you look at that and you look at where it's come, it's pervasive everywhere. But the problem with the pervasive everywhere is you get latency. And so you can't really compute everything at one core node. You have to have edge, especially around low latency, around intelligence, because the overloading of the internet is going to happen. Cloud is good, but mission critical things don't happen in the cloud, they happen locally. And as the internet goes everywhere, it's that decision making locally that becomes important. And it's that difference in the decision making. You can't have the same decision making in agriculture as you can in cars. You have to have the intelligence built in locally for what's important, and that learning and that teaching and that understanding, that decision making becomes important. Now, all of that leads to a fragmented industry. I hate to tell you this, but the more nodes there are, the more different people they go, oh, I can design X and Y. How do you put that together? Well, most college students can put together a demo around that. But how do you scale it out to 1 million units? That's hard. How do you scale it out to 1 billion units? That's even harder. Because what you want to have is all the software that continually gets tested, continually gets updated. And you can't do that in a fragmented vertical world. So what we've done with Foundries is enable this horizontal industry where both value added can be created by adding AI at the edge and ML at the edge and different applications and different hardware, while still enabling software platforms to be written in a way that you can support these critical devices for 10, 20, 30 years to be able to patch them. And so we took some of that old technology that started off as embedded and tools, We took some of the technology that is cloud and DevOps, and we created a platform that's similar to Android, but it is horizontal, that it allows some of these new technologies to be deployed, not just once, but to be able to be supported for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, to be updated and secured, to be made sure that the right software is run, and to be mission critical, because the last thing we want to do is put hardware in place that then allows more bugs over time to come in. So you need to be able to add value. You need to be able to create real opportunities for P&L improvements to people's lives and ultimately different companies. And every time there's a change in an industry, there's some winners and losers. And I will always want to be on the winner's side. And the only way you can be winners is to be ahead of the game and take some risks.
For our listeners, Ian just really mapped out a key component of the whole ecosystem. And that's what he's accomplishing with Foundries.io. But with that are all the devices and all the different technologies that make themselves present, not only now, but in the future. And so when we look at these IoT-based devices, let's talk about IoT. How do you see IoT in general evolving over the next 5 years?
I think IoT is critical to everybody. You look at different verticals from agriculture to medical to education to automotive. It's that decision-making locally that really enables how these verticals will develop over time. You cannot have IoT without edge compute and ML really to enable that. But the problem with that becomes fragmentation. Every piece of hardware is different. You can have a different device running medical as in your car. You can have a different gateway. You can have a different printer. Everything is different. It's thousands of different permutations, which leads to fragmentation, which leads to security issues. So you're going to have interesting conversations around insurance. You're going to have interesting conversations about liability. You're going to have interesting conversations about how you support things for 5, 10, 15, 20 years without truck rolls. And so for me, the problem with IoT has been everything has been hand cranked. And so you get lots of consultancy businesses. What it's really needed is product businesses that allow people to plug and play and make things easy. And until we have that, you're never going to get that decision making at the edge fully implemented that allows the true value of IoT to come into play. And we're always going to talk about it and never get it done. So it's about how do you create an ecosystem really that enables those decisions at the edge to be done in a critical, secure, and an intelligent way.
Totally agree. And this ecosystem development is what I think that's the part of where we are today. I use this word a lot, tip of the iceberg, and we're just at the beginning of this whole environment as it plays its way out. And when I see these IoT-based applications and devices, I mean, anywhere from what's in our home and little widgets and so on, things that are going to be introduced over time, I think where we get excited from BrainChip's perspective is the fact that intelligence is what's going to really drive devices. And as you talked about going from millions to billions of devices, is being able to make these products intelligent. And that means we're integrating AI. And that's where you're now hearing a lot about AIoT. And so when you think of AI and you think about the impact that it'll have in the AIoT space, let's talk about it this way. Tell us what you think would be 2 very interesting applications or devices that will be incorporating AI that will change our daily lives in the IoT space.
There are a number of devices that really you can look at, I'll pick a couple that are close to my heart. One's medical. I've done some work with a bunch of medical people, and the first one is really around a heart pacemaker. The thing that you want to have in a heart pacemaker is an understanding of your body, how it works, how it functions, what's normal, what's not, what to look for. You also want it to be connected to make sure it has the latest software in there, the latest thinking of what's real, and also be able to upload its data. But what you really want to have is your pacemaker to be secure. The last thing you want to have is somebody hacking your pacemaker. And so for me, the medical devices, the medical industry is going to become a lot more pervasive, a lot more personal. Whereas now you're getting people treated the same way. We all know that what we're treated with should be a lot more personal, based on biology, based on our physiology, based on our trends. We can get a lot more of that intelligence locally based on a lot more of the medical devices coming out with AI. For me, that's a critical thing. I think the way that medicine and the medical industry is going to work really needs that critical personal decision making as part of anything that we have, not just in the cloud, but really at the edge as well. It needs to be real time. It needs to be understandable. It needs to be intelligent, and it needs to be secure. And for me, I love medical. I think it's going to change the world for a lot of people. The second one is agriculture. And I'm a sheep farmer. I've talked about being a sheep farmer before. I love my sheep. They're a very interesting way of understanding how climate change works, how ecology works. And so for me, I've grown up over the last 20 years understanding a lot more about agriculture. Every season different. Every time you sow seeds is different. When the farmers in the UK 100 years ago decided to plant seeds, they needed the ground to be warm enough. And the best way of finding out how the ground was warm enough was they dropped their trousers and they put their bare bottoms on the ground. And if they could sit there for 20 seconds, the ground was warm enough to put seeds in. Now, we don't need that. What we need is devices that can go, what's the moisture levels? What's the nitrogen levels? What's the future weather forecast looking like? And really doing it on a local basis, and then being able to go and graze the animals at the right time for the right growth of the grass. All of that needs to be done locally. It can't be done on a central server somewhere. That needs to have the intelligence locally. It needs to be connected devices. It needs to be measurements in the ground, but it also needs to be part of my tractor equipment that sits there and goes, this is the right thing to do. Because how you get the extra 5, 10, 15, 20% efficiency from your land is not by looking on the internet, it's by looking locally at what's going on and be able to make those critical decisions of when to fertilize and when to plant and when to graze and when to crop rotate and when not to do things. And so for me, medical, critical. I think it's going to change the planet. It's going to change lifestyles for lots of people if we can make that work, and it needs to be secure. And I also think agriculture, if we're going to feed the planet, we need those robot devices. We need those intelligent machines right on the edge, because locally is when those decisions are going to be made, not nationally or continentally.
It's amazing, Ian. You hit on two key aspects of what we have as a theme here at BrainChip. And it's a question that I didn't include in my thoughts today, but you just hit the nail on the head. We talk a lot about beneficial AI and medical devices and applications, being able to have that functionality remotely, have it leverage privacy and security. These are key aspects, and you highlighted that. And so for us at BrainChip, we're excited about the prospects of being able to be a part of the evolution and growth of intelligent devices that, as you've said, are tailored to each of us from an individual standpoint. You hit it right on the head. But even further than that, being a sheep farmer, I'm not a sheep farmer, and I haven't spent a lot of time with sheep. You did get me by dropping my trousers and seeing if the ground is warm and recognizing that we've come a long way. And where we're going is in the right direction. As you said, these devices connected at the field level between, as you said, your tractor and being able to have devices that recognize the moisture and so on, without depending on communicating to the cloud, because each region, each farmer has a different land to work with. You're right. And again, these are two main dynamics of when we talk about beneficial AI. It's feeding the planet and being able to make sure that everyone has the ability to have wellness. And from that end. So for me personally, I knew this was going to be a great conversation. I'm really glad that you highlighted those. I am going to ask you a question because you brought it up when we were just chatting earlier regarding LifeScore. And if you could just take a moment and talk a little bit about LifeScore before we wrap up our podcast, I'd really appreciate it, because this is an amazing thing as well. It does incorporate AI into it, and what you're doing there, I think, is really going to pave the way for the future in another avenue or another area. So please, let's talk about LifeScore a bit.
LifeScore Music is another one of my little babies that we created. If you look at music helps you relax, helps you become stimulated. It's used really as a emotional change or an emotional crutch. Everybody uses it. Every culture on the planet uses it. And we've got very used to listening to radio and our favorite songs. We've got used to driving to it. We haven't really understood how to create music. And there's a bunch of different ways to create music. You can have a machine learn Beethoven in equals better Beethoven out, supposedly. We haven't really got there yet. Another way is how we've done it at LifeScore, is to take music, cut it up into Lego blocks, and then put it back together again in different dynamic ways based on various algorithms and learning. We've done that at LifeScore. We've done it with cars. We've won a Webby and were Emmy nominated for doing it with Twitch and how they worked in their artificial TV program, which was live TV. We did music for that live based on their chat going through the TV web at the time, so we could dynamically change the music based on audience influence. We can do various different ways of altering music based on running machines or sleep patterns. And so music becomes individual then. You are composing the music based on what you do and how you want to feel. Music then is not about listening to the Beatles or listening to the Rolling Stones or Coldplay. Music is about how you want to feel and how it affects you, and you can dynamically control and compose the music based on that. And we're lucky enough to work with Abbey Road and Warner and major car companies and major TV companies, major fitness brands, really around not replacing music, but having music in a place that has never had music before, allowing everybody to compose, allowing everybody to allow that music to change and affect and enhance their emotion. And that's what we've done with LifeScore.
That's fantastic. And I know we'll talk a little bit more about that in the future as well. So we wish you the best of luck with both Foundries.io and with LifeScore and all your other endeavors that you have going on as well. So the way we wrap up our podcast is we always end our podcast with what I call my favorite question. So my favorite question is, Ian, who is your favorite superhero and why?
You briefed me on this question and I struggled with it. And I struggled with it because I have so many. You look at, my daughter is a big fan of Marvel Comics and she went through all of them going back to the 1930s. I looked at my life and what's happened and growing up, and I've got superheroes from when I was growing up. And I made a list of superheroes of people who I think are super. And I've been lucky enough to be touched by some of them. And so in the industry, I look at Andy Grove, I look at Warren East at Rolls-Royce, and I think they're superheroes. I know of the two people I've ever worked for, I'd go work for them again. And I've told both of them. I haven't told anybody else who worked for them. So that probably says a lot. I look at people like Ernest Shackleton, who had led an expedition to the South Pole and had his whole team shipwrecked, and he went and rescued them. I look at two people that I really admire the most, though. And the two people, one is Vince Lombardi. And what Vince Lombardi did with a small team on a very low budget, created a team, created not just a team, but created the way that football's played, influenced all the coaches after him, influenced leadership across the board. And I remember very few quotes in my life, but one of them, I remember Vince Lombardi saying, the measure of who we are is what we do with what we have. And enabling his team very clearly to be the best that they can, both individually and collectively. The second person is a sheep farmer. And for all the Australians out there, I apologise, because the sheep farmer I'm referring to, and Rob's now going to go, I've never heard of this guy, is a guy called Colin Meads. Colin Meads is probably the best New Zealand rugby player that's ever been, is probably the best rugby player that has ever been. But more importantly, he set the culture for New Zealand rugby. And New Zealand rugby is around team and leadership. It's about being humble, being able to everybody cleaning the dressing room after you've played. It's about leaving a legacy, having the shirt be more powerful after you've left it rather than before it. Being able to go and draw out traditions. Being able to be a team player. There's nobody bigger than the team. Being able to have a look at a team and go, how do you go for the gaps? How do you get that extra 5% better? And Colin Meads set that culture. And that led to New Zealand becoming the winningest team, not just in rugby, but in all international sports. And for me, the two superheroes I really have are Vince Lombardi and Colin Meads. And I think that what they do really change industries, really set an example. And if I can be 1% of either of those guys, I'll be totally humbled.
That was awesome. Thank you. Because, you just highlighted two extremely impactful figures in your world and how you've not only built upon that, but taken and instilled that mindset into your everyday life. And for all of us, we can get something from that. And Ian, I want to thank you for your insight and your feedback today. It's truly appreciated. This was an amazing conversation. I look forward to doing this again with you in the future. On behalf of the BrainChip team, we want to thank all of our listeners, investors, analysts, employees, and everyone interested in learning more about AI and BrainChip. We truly appreciate all of your passion and support. And our podcast series will continue. And until our next podcast, we wish everyone to stay healthy, happy, and most importantly, stay out of trouble.
Thanks for listening to the BrainChip podcast. Please remember to rate and review on your favorite podcast platform.